The emergency room at City General Hospital was oddly quiet that Tuesday evening. The usual chaos of rushing gurneys and urgent calls had settled into a rare moment of calm. Nurse Chen, who had been working the night shift for over 15 years, was catching up on paperwork at the reception desk when the automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh. The sight that greeted her made her pen freeze mid-sentence. A small figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the parking lot lights. It took Nurse Chen a moment to process what she was seeing. A young black girl, no more than 12 years old, holding something wrapped in what appeared to be a jacket. But it was the tiny pink hand peeking out from the bundle that made Nurse Chen's heart skip a beat. The girl walked forward with slow, deliberate steps, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Her braids were slightly messy, and her school uniform showed signs of a long day, but her expression carried a determination that seemed far beyond her years. As she approached the desk, the bundle in her arms moved slightly, and a soft whimper echoed through the quiet waiting room. "I found a baby," the girl announced, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I think it needs help." The calm professionalism that had carried Nurse Chen through countless emergencies kicked in immediately. She pressed the call button for additional staff while quickly moving around the desk. The girl carefully shifted the bundle, revealing a newborn infant, strikingly pale against the dark fabric of the jacket that wrapped it. What happened next was like a carefully choreographed dance. Dr. Rivera appeared within seconds, followed by two nurses. They quickly but gently took the baby, checking vital signs while peppered the young girl with questions. The child's responses were surprisingly clear and composed, though her eyes never left the infant. "The baby was in a box," she explained, twisting the hem of her uniform skirt. "Behind my apartment building. I heard crying when I was taking out the trash." The medical team worked efficiently, confirming that while the baby was cold, its vital signs were stable. Through it all, the young girl stood nearby, shifting from foot to foot but refusing to leave. When a social worker arrived to speak with her, she finally shared her name and story. She lived in the Pine Grove apartments with her grandmother, who worked evening shifts as a cleaner. She had been doing her homework when she took a break to handle the household chores, including taking out the trash. That's when she heard the crying. "At first, I thought it was a cat," she explained to Ms. Thompson, the social worker. "But something told me to check. The box was behind the dumpster, kind of hidden. When I opened it," she paused, taking a deep breath. "Well, I knew I had to do something." What she did next showed remarkable presence of mind. Instead of panicking or running to tell an adult, she had carefully picked up the baby, wrapping it in her own jacket. Using her phone, she had searched for the nearest hospital. Finding that her grandmother wouldn't be home for hours and that no neighbors were around, she had made the decision to walk to the hospital herself. "It was cold outside," she explained simply. "I didn't want to wait." The walk had taken her almost 40 minutes. Through busy streets and gathering darkness, she had carried her precious burden, keeping the baby close to her body for warmth. Not once had she considered giving up or taking an easier path. As the evening progressed, more details emerged. The baby was a girl, probably no more than a few hours old when she was abandoned. Thanks to the young girl's quick action, she had avoided any serious complications from exposure. The police were notified, and an investigation was quietly launched to find the birth mother. The hospital staff found themselves deeply moved by the young girl's actions. In a world where adults often hesitated to get involved, this child had acted with instinctive compassion and remarkable wisdom. Nurse Chen brought her a hot chocolate from the cafeteria, watching as she curled up in a waiting room chair, finally showing signs of tiredness. When her grandmother arrived, having been contacted by the social worker, the scene was emotional. The older woman gathered her granddaughter in her arms, tears streaming down her face as she learned what had happened. "That's my girl," she kept saying, her voice thick with pride. "That's my brave, smart girl." The story could have ended there, another quiet drama in the endless stream of emergency room tales. But something about this particular night, this particular child, seemed to touch everyone who witnessed it. Perhaps it was the sight of her small figure walking through those doors, carrying a burden far bigger than herself. Perhaps it was the simple way she had explained her actions, as if anyone would have done the same thing. As the night shift changed to morning, the young girl and her grandmother finally headed home. The baby had been transferred to the neonatal unit, her future uncertain but her life secure thanks to one child's courage. Nurse Chen watched them leave, thinking about how sometimes the biggest heroes come in the smallest packages. In the days that followed, the story would grow and spread, touching hearts far beyond the hospital walls. But in that moment, in the quiet of the emergency room, something profound had already changed. A young girl had reminded them all what it meant to be truly human, to act with compassion, without hesitation or thought of reward. The automatic doors slid closed behind the girl and her grandmother, but the impact of what had happened that night was just beginning to unfold. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories start in the most ordinary moments, with a simple decision to do what's right, no matter how difficult the path might be. As the hospital staff gathered around the young girl in the emergency room, Dr. Rivera gently pulled up a chair beside her. The social worker, Miss Thompson, sat on her other side, clipboard in hand but momentarily forgotten. There was something about this child that commanded attention, not in a loud or demanding way, but in the quiet confidence she carried. "Can you tell us your name?" Dr. Rivera asked softly. The girl sat up straighter in her chair, her school uniform slightly rumpled from the long walk. "I'm Amara," she replied, her voice clear despite her evident exhaustion. "Amara Williams. I'm 12 years old." As she spoke, her eyes kept drifting to the doorway where they had taken the baby for examination. The medical team noticed how she seemed to be listening for any sound from that direction, her attention split between answering questions and monitoring for the infant's cries. "You've done something really remarkable tonight, Amara," Ms. Thompson said, noting how the girl's shoulders relaxed slightly at the reassurance. "Can you walk us through exactly what happened?" Amara's story unfolded like a puzzle piece by piece. She lived with her grandmother in a modest apartment complex on the east side of town. Her grandmother worked as a night custodian at the local community college, which meant Amara often handled evening chores on her own. She was responsible, her grandmother had taught her well, and she took pride in helping maintain their home. "I was doing my math homework," she explained, her fingers absently tracing the one edge of her backpack. "We had these really hard fraction problems, and I needed a break. That's when I remembered I hadn't taken out the trash yet." The simple decision to take a homework break had set in motion a chain of events that would change multiple lives. As Amara continued her story, the hospital staff learned more about the remarkable young woman sitting before them. She described hearing the cry, faint at first, almost lost in the evening wind. Most people might have ignored it, might have hurried back inside to the warmth of their homes. But something made Amara pause. "It didn't sound like a regular cat or bird," she explained. "It sounded different, like someone who really needed help." Following the sound led her behind the dumpsters, where she found a cardboard box partially hidden behind some discarded furniture. "I was scared to look inside at first," she admitted, and for the first time, her composure wavered slightly. "But then I heard the cry again, and I knew I had to check." Inside the box, wrapped in a thin blanket, lay the newborn baby. Amara's description of that moment was simple but powerful. The baby was so small, and it looked so cold. "I didn't even think about it. I just took off my jacket and picked her up." What impressed the hospital staff most was what Amara did next. Instead of panicking or running to find an adult who might or might not be home, she had taken action. She described pulling out her phone and searching for the nearest hospital. When she realized it was a 2-mile walk, she didn't hesitate. "I tried calling my grandmother, but she can't answer her phone during work," Amara explained. "I thought about calling 911, but I was worried they might take too long to find us behind the building. The baby felt really cold, and I remembered from science class that babies can't regulate their temperature like adults can." This comment caused Dr. Rivera and the nurses to exchange impressed looks. Amara's quick thinking and basic medical knowledge had quite possibly saved the infant's life. As she continued her story, more details about Amara emerged. She was in the advanced math program at her school. She helped run the recycling club. She spent weekends helping her grandmother tend a small community garden. Each detail painted a picture of a young person who had been raised to think of others, to take responsibility, and to act when action was needed. "Weren't you scared?" one of the nurses asked. "Walking all that way in the dark?" Amara considered this question carefully before answering. "I was scared something would happen to the baby," she said finally. "But that was scarier than anything else. So I just kept walking. I talked to her the whole way, telling her it would be okay." The social worker's notes filled page after page. He was a child who had not only saved a life, but had done so with remarkable intelligence and composure. She had kept the baby warm against her body, maintained constant movement to generate heat, and even thought to check that the infant's mouth and nose weren't covered during the long walk. As the interview continued, Amara began to show the first signs of tiredness. Her answers became shorter, and she stifled occasional yawns, yet she still refused to leave until she knew the baby was okay. "You can go home and rest," Dr. Rivera assured her. "The baby is in good hands." But Amara shook her head. "I promised her she'd be okay," she said simply. "I want to make sure." That statement, more than anything else, captured the essence of who Amara was. A promise made to an abandoned newborn who couldn't possibly understand or remember it meant everything to her. It was a glimpse into the kind of person she was becoming, someone who understood that integrity and compassion weren't just big words, but actions that could change lives. As the night progressed and her grandmother was finally contacted, Amara's story began to spread through the hospital. Staff members who hadn't even been involved stopped by to meet the young girl who had shown such extraordinary courage and kindness. Each time someone praised her actions, Amara responded with the same quiet humility. "I just did what needed to be done." In those few hours, Amara had done more than save a life. She had reminded everyone who heard her story that age is no barrier to heroism, that compassion knows no color, and that sometimes the most remarkable acts of courage come from simply deciding to do the right thing, one step at a time. The pediatric wing of City General Hospital burst into focused activity as the medical team rushed to treat the newborn infant. The baby's tiny cries echoed through the corridor as Dr. Rivera led the response, her experienced hands quickly checking vital signs, while nurses prepared the necessary equipment. "Temperature is 95.2 Fahrenheit, called out one of the nurses, concern evident in her voice. The normal temperature for a newborn should be between 97.8 and 98.6 degrees. The baby was suffering from mild hypothermia, a dangerous condition for one so young." Through it all, Amara stood at the doorway, her school backpack clutched tightly to her chest. Despite the staff's gentle suggestions that she wait in the reception area, she remained rooted to the spot, her eyes fixed on the small bundle now lying under the warming lights. "Is she going to be okay?" Amara's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the room. Dr. Rivera looked up from her examination, seeing the genuine concern in the young girl's eyes. "Thanks to you, we got to her in time," the doctor assured her. "We're warming her up slowly and carefully. That's exactly what we need to do." The next few hours were critical. The medical team worked with practiced efficiency, setting up an IV line to provide fluids and carefully monitoring the baby's temperature as it gradually rose. They estimated the infant was only a few hours old. The umbilical cord had been cut roughly, suggesting a hurried delivery away from medical care. What amazed the staff wasn't just the baby's resilience, but Amara's continued presence. She watched every procedure with intense focus, asking thoughtful questions that surprised even the veteran nurses. When the baby's temperature finally reached a safe level, Amara's relief was visible in the way her shoulders relaxed and her grip on her backpack loosened. "You kept her alive," Nurse Chen explained to Amara, taking a moment to help the young girl understand the importance of her actions. "The way you held her close to your body during that long walk. That's exactly what she needed. It's called skin-to-skin contact, and it's one of the best ways to warm up a cold baby." Amara absorbed this information with the same quiet intensity she had shown all evening. "I remembered reading about emperor penguins," she said softly. "How they huddle together to keep their babies warm in the cold. I thought maybe it would work the same way." The nurse smiled, touched by how this young girl had applied such knowledge in an emergency. "That's exactly right. You gave her the best chance she could have had." As the night progressed, the baby began showing positive signs. Her color improved from a worrying pale blue to a healthy pink. Her cries grew stronger, more demanding. A good sign in a newborn. The medical team conducted various tests, checking for any complications from the exposure to cold. During a quiet moment, Dr. Rivera took time to explain each procedure to Amara. "We're checking her reflexes now," she said, demonstrating how the baby's tiny fingers would curl around an adult finger when stroked. "This is called the grasp reflex. It's one way we know her nervous system is working properly." Amara watched, fascinated, as the baby responded to each test. When the infant grabbed onto the doctor's finger, a small smile crossed the girl's face, the first real smile anyone had seen from her that evening. The nurses noticed how the baby seemed to calm when Amara was nearby. During one particularly fussy moment, the infant's cries settled as soon as Amara started speaking softly to her. "She remembers your voice," one of the nurses explained. "You talked to her during your whole walk here, remember? She knows you're safe." This connection between rescuer and rescued touched everyone who witnessed it. Here was a child who had not only saved a life, but had formed a bond of trust with the tiny stranger she'd found. It was a powerful reminder of how human connection transcends all barriers. As midnight approached, the medical team had more good news. The baby was maintaining her temperature on her own, taking formula well, and showing all the signs of a healthy newborn despite her rough start in life. She would need to stay in the hospital for observation, but the critical danger had passed. "You should be very proud," Dr. Rivera told Amara, as they watched the now sleeping infant in her warming bed. "Many adults might have walked past that box or been too afraid to act. But you didn't just help, you did everything exactly right." Amara considered these words carefully before responding. "I just kept thinking about how scared she must have been," she said. "Nobody deserves to be alone when they're scared." The wisdom in those words, coming from someone so young, left a lasting impression on everyone in the room. It was a reminder that compassion often comes from a place of simple truth, the ability to recognize another's pain and choose to do something about it. As the night shift began to wind down, the baby was transferred to the neonatal unit for continued care. The staff had started calling her Lucky, though they knew she would eventually receive a different, permanent name. But they all agreed that Lucky was exactly what she had been, lucky that out of all the people who might have passed by that cardboard box, it was Amara who had heard her cry. The story of that night would be told many times in the months and years to come, the story of a 12-year-old girl who had walked through the darkness to bring light and life to an abandoned newborn. But for those who were there, who witnessed those critical hours, what stood out most was not just the happy ending, but the quiet determination of a child who simply refused to look away when someone needed help. In the warm, quiet hospital room, as the baby slept peacefully under gentle lights, something profound had taken place. It wasn't just a life that had been saved, but a powerful lesson that had been taught, that sometimes the biggest differences in this world are made by those who don't stop to question whether they're big enough for the task at hand. As dawn broke over the city, 2 police detectives arrived at City General Hospital to begin their investigation. The story of an abandoned newborn had quickly made its way through official channels, and they knew time was crucial in these cases. What they hadn't expected was to find their most valuable witness would be a 12-year-old girl. Amara sat in the hospital's small family room, an untouched cup of hot chocolate growing cold beside her. Her grandmother had arrived hours earlier, but understood her granddaughter's determination to stay until she could help the police. The detectives, a kind-faced woman and her younger partner, approached carefully, noticing how tired yet alert the young girl appeared. "Can you show us exactly where you found the baby?" the female detective asked gently, spreading out a map of the neighborhood. Amara leaned forward, her finger tracing the path from her apartment building to the specific spot behind the dumpsters. "There were some old chairs there too," she added, remembering details that made the detectives exchange impressed looks. "And I noticed something else. There were fresh tire tracks in the mud beside the dumpster. They weren't there yesterday when I took out the trash after school." This detail caught the detectives' attention. They had been expecting a simple account of finding the baby, but Amara's natural observational skills provided them with valuable clues. The girl continued sharing details she had noticed. The box had been dry on the inside, despite the damp ground, suggesting it hadn't been there long. There had been a receipt stuck to the bottom of the box from a nearby convenience store. The younger detective took careful notes as Amara described the exact timing of events. She had found the baby at approximately 6:45 p.m. She knew this because she had just finished watching her favorite after-school science program, which ended at 6:30. The walk to the hospital had taken about 40 minutes, putting her arrival just before 7:30 p.m. As the investigation progressed, more pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The convenience store's security cameras showed a young woman, clearly in distress, purchasing supplies earlier that evening. The receipt matched the one Amara had noticed on the box. The police work continued throughout the morning, but what truly touched the detectives was how Amara had handled the situation. When they asked why she hadn't simply called 911, her answer revealed wisdom beyond her years. "The baby was so cold," she explained, her voice steady but soft. "I learned in science class that babies can get sick really fast if they're too cold. I was worried that if I called and waited, it might take too long for help to come. Sometimes you have to do things yourself." The investigation led them to a nearby high school. The young mother, they discovered, was a 16-year-old student who had hidden her pregnancy from everyone. Scared and alone, she had made a desperate decision that could have ended tragically if not for Amara's intervention. When the detectives finally located the young mother, they found a frightened teenager who had been hiding in her bedroom since that night, tormented by what she had done. She broke down in tears when they told her the baby was safe, saved by a 12-year-old girl who had refused to walk away. Back at the hospital, Amara finally agreed to go home and rest, but only after extracting a promise from the nurses that they would call if the baby needed anything. As she gathered her things, the head nurse pulled her aside. "You know," the nurse said softly, "that baby might not be here if you hadn't found her. But what's even more special is how you found her. You weren't just in the right place at the right time. You chose to stop, to listen, to look, and to act. That's what makes you extraordinary." Amara considered these words carefully in the thoughtful way that had impressed everyone who met her. "I just hope the baby's mom is okay too," she said finally. "She must have been really scared to do what she did." This compassion, extending even to someone who had abandoned a newborn, struck everyone who heard it. While others might have judged harshly, this young girl understood that fear and desperation could drive people to make terrible choices. The police investigation continued over the next few days, but it took a different turn than similar cases. Instead of focusing solely on prosecution, the detectives worked to connect the young mother with social services and counseling. Amara's perspective had influenced even these seasoned officers, reminding them that sometimes people needed help more than punishment. The story began spreading throughout the community, touching hearts and changing perspectives. Local news reporters wanted to interview Amara, but she politely declined, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. Her only request was to be kept informed about the baby's progress. What emerged from the investigation wasn't just the story of an abandoned baby, but a complex tale of human compassion, wisdom, and the ripple effects of one person's choices. Amara's decision to act had not only saved a newborn's life, but had also created a chance for healing and understanding in a situation that could have ended very differently. The young mother, through her counseling, eventually wrote a letter thanking Amara. The words were simple but heartfelt. "You saved not just my baby, but me too. You showed me that there's always someone who cares, even when you think you're all alone." As the investigation wrapped up, the detectives made one final visit to Amara's apartment. They wanted to tell her in person that both the baby and the mother were getting the help they needed. They found her doing homework at the kitchen table, approaching this normal task with the same quiet focus she had shown throughout the entire incident. The case would eventually be closed, marked not as a tragedy but as a story of hope and redemption. In their final report, the detectives made special mention of how a child's wisdom and compassion had changed the outcome for everyone involved. Sometimes, they noted, the best detective work isn't about finding someone to blame, but about understanding the full story and helping everyone heal. As the story of Amara and the baby unfolded, the hospital staff began learning more about the remarkable young girl who had walked through their doors that fateful evening. Through conversations with her grandmother and teachers who came to visit, a fuller picture emerged of a child whose actions that night were not just a random act of kindness, but a reflection of who she truly was. Living in a modest two-bedroom apartment with her grandmother, Amara had learned responsibility early in life. Her grandmother worked long hours as a custodian to provide for them, and Amara had stepped up to help manage their household. She cooked simple meals, kept their home tidy and still maintained excellent grades in school. She's always been an old soul, her grandmother told the nurses during one visit, her eyes shining with pride. Even when she was little, she would notice things others missed. If someone was sad, she'd draw them a picture. If a classmate forgot their lunch, she'd share hers. What touched the hospital staff most was learning about the 40 minutes Amara spent searching online before bringing in the baby. They discovered that she had not only looked up the nearest hospital, but had also researched basic infant care while waiting for her phone to charge enough for the journey. Her search history told the story: how to keep a newborn warm, what to do if a baby is cold, signs of baby hypothermia, safe way to carry a newborn. In those crucial moments, she had turned herself into an impromptu expert, determined to do everything right. The school principal, who visited to check on her student, shared how Amara had started a buddy system in the cafeteria, making sure no student ever had to eat lunch alone. She notices the quiet ones, the principal explained. The ones others might walk past. She's always been that way. Despite living in foster care herself since her parents' accident 3 years ago, Amara had never let her circumstances define her. Her grandmother had become her legal guardian, and together they had built a life full of small kindnesses and daily courage. Their apartment might have been modest, but it was filled with books from the library and plants they tended together. The 2-mile walk Amara had made to the hospital that night wasn't unusual for her. She often walked to save bus fare, carefully planning her routes and always staying aware of her surroundings. That night, she had used those same street-smart instincts to keep herself and her precious cargo safe. I knew which streets had better lighting, she explained when asked about her journey, and I remembered which shops were still open in case we needed help. She had wrapped the baby in her own jacket, keeping one arm free to hold her phone for light and directions. Her science teacher brought in Amara's latest project, a study on how different animals care for their young. It was this research that had given her the idea to use body heat to warm the cold infant. She doesn't just learn things, the teacher explained. She connects them to the real world. The more people learned about Amara, the more they understood that her actions that night weren't just instinct. They were the result of a lifetime of choosing to be aware, to be prepared, and to care about others. Her grandmother had taught her that education wasn't just about books. It was about using what you learned to help others. When asked about her future plans, Amara spoke of becoming a doctor or a social worker. "I want to help people who don't have anyone else to help them," she said simply. Her grandmother had taught her that sometimes the biggest differences are made by people who just show up and do what needs to be done. The story of her walking 2 miles in the cold while caring for a newborn touched hearts throughout the community. But what made an even deeper impression was learning about the quiet determination that had preceded that walk, the research, the careful planning, the practical solutions she had found, while others might have panicked. Local journalists who interviewed her teachers discovered a student who didn't just excel in academics, but who made time to tutor younger children after school. She had started a small garden in an unused corner of the schoolyard, growing vegetables that she donated to the local food bank. She doesn't do these things for attention, her math teacher explained. Half the time, we don't even know she's done them until someone else mentions it. She just sees what needs to be done and does it. The cold night when Amara walked into the emergency room wasn't the first time she had helped others. It was just the most visible example of a life already dedicated to making a difference in small, consistent ways. Her grandmother had taught her that heroes aren't born in big moments, they're made in all the small choices that come before. As the story spread, people began to understand that what made Amara extraordinary wasn't just her actions that night, but the person she had chosen to become long before she heard a baby's cry behind a dumpster. She had already built the habits of caring, of taking action, of using what she knew to help others. Her grandmother summed it up best during one conversation with the hospital staff. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a chance to do something important. Amara just does what's important every day, and when the big moment came, she was ready. In the weeks that followed, as the baby grew stronger and arrangements were made for her future, Amara returned to her normal routine. She still did her homework, helped with chores, and tended her plants. But she had shown everyone who knew her story that extraordinary acts often come from ordinary people who have practiced being ready when they're needed. The jacket she had used to wrap the baby that night hung in her closet, washed and returned by the hospital staff. Sometimes, when she walked past it, she would smile, remembering not the cold or the fear, but the moment when she first heard the baby's strong, healthy cry in the emergency room. That sound, she knew, was worth every step of her journey. The story of Amara and the baby began spreading beyond the hospital walls, touching hearts and inspiring conversations throughout the community. It started with whispers in hospital corridors, then rippled outward like waves in a pond, each telling adding new layers of meaning to an already remarkable tale. Local coffee shops buzzed with discussions about the 12-year-old girl who had walked 2 miles in the cold to save a stranger. Parents used the story to teach their children about courage and compassion. Teachers incorporated it into their lessons about civic responsibility and human kindness. At the community center where Amara's grandmother worked, people began leaving notes of encouragement and small gifts. But what truly touched them was how the story was changing people's perspectives and actions in unexpected ways. A group of high school students, inspired by Amara's actions, started a peer support program for classmates dealing with difficult situations. They named it the Amara Project, focusing on creating safe spaces where young people could ask for help without fear of judgment. What struck me about Amara's story, said one student volunteer, was how she didn't just help the baby, she thought about the mother too. She understood that sometimes people make desperate choices when they're scared and alone. We want to help before things get to that point. The local newspaper ran a feature story that went beyond the dramatic rescue. They explored how a young girl's actions had sparked a community-wide conversation about responsibility, compassion, and the power of individual choice. The reporter interviewed people whose lives had been touched by the story. I was having a rough day, shared a bus driver, when I heard about this girl who walked 2 miles in the cold to save a baby. It made me think about what really matters. Now, when I see someone running for the bus, I wait those extra few seconds. Small kindnesses matter. The impact rippled through social media, where people shared their own stories of times when strangers had helped them in moments of need. The hashtag #BalikAmara started trending locally, with people posting about small acts of kindness they had performed or witnessed. At Amara's school, the principal noticed a shift in how students treated each other. Incidents of bullying decreased. More students volunteered for peer tutoring. The buddy system Amara had started in the cafeteria expanded, with older students making sure younger ones always had someone to sit with. She showed us that age doesn't matter when it comes to making a difference, one 8th grader explained. You don't have to wait until you're grown up to help someone, you just have to be willing to try. Local businesses took notice too. A bookstore created a display featuring books about everyday heroes and community service. A pharmacy started a program to provide emergency supplies to new mothers in need. Each initiative traced its inspiration back to the story of a young girl who refused to look away when help was needed. The City Council held a special session to discuss youth empowerment and community support systems. They invited social workers, educators, and community leaders to share ideas about how to better support young people and families in crisis. What this young girl did was extraordinary, said one council member, but what's even more extraordinary is how she did it. She used knowledge, compassion, and resources available to anyone. She showed us that heroism isn't about having special powers, it's about using what you have to help others. Religious leaders of different faiths spoke about the story in their sermons and services, not focusing on any particular belief, but on the universal message of human kindness that transcended all boundaries. A local artist created a mural in the children's wing of the hospital depicting a diverse group of young people helping others in various ways. Though Amara's story had inspired it, the artist made sure no single figure was prominent. The message was that anyone could be a hero in their own way. The police department revised its training protocols, incorporating lessons learned from how Amara had handled the situation. They emphasized the importance of considering the human element in crisis situations and looking beyond immediate circumstances to understand underlying causes. Community organizations began offering free classes in basic first aid and emergency response, designed specifically for young people. The classes always included discussions about how to recognize when someone needs help and how to safely provide assistance. Local pediatricians reported more parents bringing their teenagers in for basic health education, wanting their children to have the kind of knowledge that had helped Amara make good decisions in a crisis. The story even reached the state capitol, where legislators began discussing ways to expand support for young people in foster care and single guardian households. Amara's success, despite her circumstances, highlighted the importance of community support systems. Through it all, Amara remained focused on her daily life, doing homework, helping her grandmother, tending her plants. When asked about the impact her actions had had on the community, she would simply smile and say, "We all have chances to help others. I just happened to hear mine crying behind a dumpster." Her humble response only enhanced the power of her story. She had shown that extraordinary moments often come disguised as ordinary choices, the choice to stop and listen, to look closer, to take action when others might walk away. The baby's story became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, someone might be walking through the cold, carrying light and warmth to those in need. But more than that, it became a catalyst for change, inspiring countless small acts of kindness that, like ripples in a pond, continued to spread outward, touching lives in ways that would never make headlines but mattered just as much. The community had been reminded that heroes don't always wear capes or carry badges. Sometimes they wear school uniforms and carry backpacks full of homework. Sometimes they walk 2 miles in the cold, talking softly to a stranger's child, proving that courage and compassion know no age limits. 6 months after that fateful night, the baby, now named Hope by her adoptive parents, was thriving in her new home. Her story had come full circle, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted that cold evening when a 12-year-old girl heard a cry behind a dumpster. The adoption process had been handled with extraordinary care, with social workers ensuring the perfect match. The chosen family had opened their hearts not just to Hope, but to her entire story. They made sure Amara knew she would always be part of Hope's life, sending regular updates and photos. "We want Hope to grow up knowing about the brave girl who saved her," her adoptive mother explained during a small gathering at the hospital. "Some children have guardian angels watching over them. Hope had one walking through the cold, carrying her to safety." The young birth mother, supported by counseling and community resources, had returned to school. She spoke occasionally at youth centers, sharing her story to help others who might be facing similar struggles. Her message was simple but powerful. There's always help available, even when you think you're alone. Amara's influence continued to grow, though not in a way most people might expect. She hadn't become a celebrity or sought attention. Instead, her impact was felt in the quiet changes that had taken root throughout the community. The youth mentorship program, inspired by her actions, had expanded to 3 other schools in the district. Called Walking Together, it paired older students with younger ones, teaching them that everyone had something to offer, regardless of their age or circumstances. On weekends, Amara could often be found in the community garden she had helped expand. What started as a small plot behind her apartment building had grown into a neighborhood project. Families gathered there to grow vegetables, share stories, and build connections. "The garden teaches us something important," Amara explained to a visitor one day while showing them around the thriving plots. "Everything starts small: seeds, ideas, acts of kindness. But with care and attention, they grow into something beautiful." The hospital where Hope had first arrived created a new protocol for handling crisis situations, incorporating lessons learned from that night. They called it the Amara Protocol, focusing on combining quick action with compassionate understanding. Local businesses had joined together to create a support network for single parents and guardians, offering everything from flexible work hours to emergency childcare. The initiative had started after they learned about Amara's grandmother, who had raised such an extraordinary young person while working long hours to make ends meet. In schools, teachers reported a lasting change in how students treated each other. The simple question, "What would Amara do?" had become a shorthand for choosing kindness over indifference, action over apathy. The city council honored Amara with a special commendation, but what made the ceremony truly special was how she used the platform. Instead of talking about herself, she spoke about hope, about community, about how everyone has the power to make a difference. "We don't need special powers to be heroes," she said in her soft but clear voice. "We just need to pay attention to care and to be willing to help when we can. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. The police department had created a youth advisory board, recognizing that young people often saw things adults might miss. They consulted with students on community issues, valuing their perspectives and insights. Hope's first birthday was celebrated quietly at the hospital where she had first arrived. The staff organized a small gathering, inviting Amara and her grandmother, Hope's adoptive parents, and a few others who had been part of her story. The cake was simple, the decorations modest, but the joy in the room was immeasurable. Hope, now a happy, healthy 1-year-old, bounced on her adoptive mother's lap, reaching out to touch Amara's face with curious fingers. "She has your smile," someone commented, watching Hope beam at everyone around her. Though not biologically related, there was something of Amara's spirit in the child's bright eyes and ready grin. The young birth mother, now doing well in school and healing from her past, sent a card expressing her gratitude. "Because of you," she wrote to Amara, "Hope has a chance at the life she deserves. And because of you, I had a chance to make things right." As the small celebration wound down, Dr. Rivera, who had been there that first night, pulled Amara aside. "Do you know what the best part of your story is?" she asked. "It's not just about one night or one baby. It's about how one person's choices can light the way for others." Amara considered this in that thoughtful way she had. "I think," she said finally, "it's about how we're all connected. Every choice we make affects someone else. We just have to remember that and try to make our choices count." The legacy of that cold night continued to grow, not in grand gestures or dramatic changes, but in countless small moments of kindness and courage. People making the choice to stop and help, to listen, to care, to take action when it would be easier to walk away. And somewhere in the city, a happy 1-year-old named Hope was growing up surrounded by love, her story a testament to the extraordinary power of ordinary people choosing to do what's right, one step at a time. The real magic wasn't in the dramatic rescue, but in how one young girl's actions had reminded an entire community that heroes walk among us every day, in school uniforms and work clothes, carrying backpacks and dreams, choosing again and again to make a difference in whatever way they can.